Leadership evolves, right? Everybody has their own way of leading people. What type of leadership did you use, sir?
I'll tell you a little story about that. I was a newly commissioned second lieutenant, assigned, and I was a platoon leader. I had 39 eager young Marines fresh out of Marine recruit training at Parris Island. And about the third day I'm there, my battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel, called three of us who had just arrived into his office. And as we came in, he shook hands and he said, "Tell me about your family." So I did, and the next two did. And then he said, "Have a seat." So we sat down opposite his desk. And none of us had ever seen a lieutenant colonel by that time, so we were pretty impressed. We were in the halls of the Montezuma guys that way. So as we sat there, he talked to us about how important we were in the future of these young men that we now command. And he said most of them have come from across America in small towns, off of farms. Some of them are from the ghettos of the city. Some have come from, travel abroad. Some others have never been outside outside the limits of their county or city. And they're not used to that. And he looked at each one of us and he said, "You are going to be the mama and the papa for your Marines." Now to tell a second lieutenant he's going to be a mama and a papa, that was pretty hard for us to comprehend at the moment.
Spell mama at that point.
Yeah, pretty hard. But as we were leaving his office, he walked to the door with us and shook hands, and he said, "Now let me tell you my final comment to you. You have a job of great importance. You're going to lead these young men into battle, and we're going to be doing that before you can expect it. But," he said, "the one thing I want you to never, ever forget, those young men are not here to serve you. You are here to serve them, and don't ever forget that." Now that was my first exposure to what today is called the concept of servant leadership.
Yes, sir.
But the principles of servant leadership are is if you take care of your troops, you're going to do well. And I did. And when I retired and went to the corporate world, I kept that concept of servant leadership, and it paid off in my civilian efforts after I was a Marine. But that was the most valuable lesson I learned about leadership. You got to care for those to whom you're responsible.
Did you say anything particular to your troops to prepare them for such a battle as Iwo Jima?
No, there wasn't anything I could say.
No.
We have to face it. At Iwo Jima, as opposed to Saipan and Tinian, which were large landmasses relatively, there wasn't any maneuvers. I mean, I didn't build a base of fire and send a squad around to flank them. I couldn't move a flank around that good. I couldn't move these guys one way or the other. We just did it. And we butted our heads against the enemy fire day after day. And each night, we simply counted our losses. Then I said, "Men, tomorrow we're going to try to advance 50 yards. And if we made 50 yards, it was a good day. And most days, sometimes we made 100 yards. So that was an exceptional day. But I'll tell you, by the afternoon of the landing, by about 3 o'clock, my battalion was so shot up that the reserve battalion had to come ashore to pass through us to pick up the fight from that. So we dropped back into reserve. How close do you want a reserve to be? We were 50 yards where they were fighting, and we were still there.
Right.
So you don't get much rest when you're in a reserve when you're 50 yards from the front line. But that's just the way life was in those days on that Iwo Jima island. But there's nothing you can do to tell a young man
How to prepare
that we're
for
going to
that.
accomplish miracles tomorrow. It's just, you know what your job is, you know what your mission is, let's go do it. Boom. And they did. People often ask me, what was your most effective weapon on Iwo Jima? Flamethrowers? Zippo tanks, the flame tanks? Bazooka? I say, no, none of those. The most effective weapon I had on Iwo Jima was the individual Marine spirit, patriotism, dedication to the Corps, dedication to his fellow Marines, dedicated to his country, and he knew I was there and was bound to get it done. A fellow once rose up after I said that and said, "Well, General, you have to face it. Sometimes you're overwhelmed. did you ever talk about withdrawing? And I said, no, we don't use that word. We don't withdraw. One of our generals said when they're surrounded by a bunch of Chinese divisions in Korea, we're simply fighting in another direction if you have to pull back. So
I like
that was
that.
the kind of attitude we bred into our young Marines in those days, and I think we still do that. But the point is, you can't glamorize death. And we knew every day when we moved forward, we're going to lose more people, because that's just the way life was. But you don't think it's going to happen to you. You just know that it's not. So you proceed with great confidence. And the Marine Corps training builds confidence.
Yeah, and the conditions were what they were.
Yeah,
Couldn't do anything about it.
absolutely.
So I had a question, General. I read a comment or a quote from you that you had said when somebody had asked you kind of the biggest thing about Iwo Jima, and you had said that you were on Iwo Jima and the Japanese were in Iwo Jima.
I wish I had said that as the original comment, but one of my friends, a good friend in the division later, said that. And it is true. We were on it and they were in it. And if you've read much about the Iwo Jima thing, the in it was there were 11 miles of tunnels. Some of them 30 feet down. One major room was 300 feet down in that volcanic rock.
Wow.
Now, that's hard labor to create that, but they did it. Their objective was to provide 17 miles of tunnels so they could go from one end of the island to the other, always underground. They didn't get that much done. When those soldiers for the Japanese had to work on those tunnels, they could only work 15 minutes at a time because the humidity and heat simply took them apart. And in those days, they didn't have access to water, access to no more additional ammunition than they had had on. So they went on a half ration of water. And when you have a half ration of water in a situation that demands hydration, or you're going to lose it, that was a tough life. And I'm one of those Americans who fought the Japanese, but I don't have any hesitation about commending them for the fight that they put up. I mean, they were young men fighting for the emperor. My young men were fighting to go home. I think that made a difference in attitude about what you're willing to do with your life. As you've read so many times, I'm sure, every Japanese defender had pledged to the emperor he would kill 10 Marines and then take his own life. It just so happens that the fewer than 1,000 that we captured, most of them were so badly wounded they couldn't take their own lives, so they became prisoners of war. So it's a tough leg to operate in that kind of environment out there, where the environmental conditions in which you work are so depressing and hard on you. So I commend them for putting up a good fight. We overpowered them, sure. I mean, after all, you put 70,000 Marines and 485 ships, we can overpower a lot of folks. Yes, sir. And we did it there. But that doesn't detract from the fact that they vowed to keep that island, because it was a gateway to Japan. It was under the Tokyo prefecture, so from a standpoint of morale to the Japanese people, it was a tremendous loss that we had our foothold on Iwo Jima. That was mainland Japan to the average Japanese back in the main islands of Japan. And that was one of the valuable adjuncts of success we enjoyed as a result of capturing Iwo Jima.
Well, these are great stories, sir, and I appreciate you sharing them with us, making a connection to the Naval Hospital. I've had the opportunity to see you twice on your trips out here, and I won't be here next time, but maybe I'll join the trip from the East Coast.
You'd love it.
I appreciate your time today and sitting and chatting with these sailors about what they do. They've got a lot under their belt, but a lot more ahead of them.
They do, and I've talked to them before we sat down like this, and I know what they've been doing, what they're going to do, and I wish them the very best, and we're going to continue to need you. You're very important to your country, and I know you've done a good job, and obviously you've stood out amongst your peers by being Sailor of the Year in whatever your department was. And I congratulate you on that. And while I would expect you two would have rotated by next year, I plan to be back next year. 6 weeks from now, I'm going to be 93 years old, but I'm coming back next year.
Hoorah.
So that's it.
Well, thank you,
So
sir.
best wishes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
I
so
appreciate
much.
it very much.
Joy to be with you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for joining us today for this conversation. I had the opportunity to meet General Snowden quite a while ago. When I heard that story, I knew it was one to share. Any other stories that are available, we're prepared to share, and we look forward to our new hospital and the stories that we'll make there.